Part 2, continuation. We ain't African.
That puts it back on the people that are strictly immigrants. Strictly immigrants. Because if they're writing up this bill and this information and this legislation, and they're putting it out as if they're only going to give it to African Americans, they're not stating in the legislation black people. They're stating people from Africa. You're going to have to prove that you came from Africa.
That's
now
what
that
makes things
opens
even
the
harder.
door. Exactly, that opens the door for actual immigrants that came from Africa, which are a lot of these pale faces.
Yep.
That brings it back to exactly how things like
the civil rights. Civil rights went the same way. They went straight to the whites.
What is this that people are getting? Like EBT, Section 8?
Yeah, what is it called? Welfare.
Yep, that brings it back to welfare that was initially created for pale faces. When they brought in these public housings, low-income housings, that was initially created for pale faces.
Yes.
In order for them to get started.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it trickled down to...
That's where suburbs come from. It comes from the subsidized housing that they, gave to the European immigrants that were coming over here from Europe or whatever in the early 1900s and so forth. So the projects that black people love to attribute their culture to wasn't even built for us. That was built for the Germans and the Jews and the Poles and all of them that was coming over here, and the Irish.
Everyone else. Because when they're dealing with African Americans, they're dealing with those people that can say right now they came from a different country.
Because the majority of the people that were already here can't prove that they came, or their ancestors came from Africa. There's no record of that, guys. The record is going to reflect and show that we were already here prior to any African or any other immigrant arriving. And I dare you to do your genealogy. I dare you.
That also puts people in a bad position who say, well, I'm just going to hop on this bandwagon for the sake of getting some type of compensation. Because now they're going to start claiming African on documents.
Now, in the first part of this video, I had talked about how Barack Hussein Obama in 2016, look this up yourself, changed the classification of the Negro, the black, to African American. Now, there were no laws, no affirmative action laws, no civil rights laws, no Emancipation Proclamation laws governed to a people called African Americans. It was governed to a people called Negroes, black, which basically means Negro. But once in 2016, when Obama and another Democrat called Wang Yang, some Asian lady from New York, decided to, let's change the classification status of this nation of people from black or Negro, which stems back to colored, which stems back to Aboriginal, Indian Aboriginal. Let's change them to African American. Once that was established on legal documentation, legal government documentation that we are now African Americans, that basically voided every legislation attributed, every treaty attributed to the so-called Aboriginal, colored, Negro blacks. So now when they want to give reparations, guess who they're going to give them to? Africans. And those black folks who aren't African, going to, like she said, they're going to claim to be African to get some money. Why do you think they changed the status of our classification in this country? Why is Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg buying up all the property and land in this country? Why is the government able to do some of the things that they're doing without the approval of the landlords, which is us? Because now we're saying we're not the landlords. We're saying that we are immigrants. We are descendants of immigrants who were brought here to be slaves, indentured servants, whatever. So basically, we have given up our property rights so we can be called African.
Okay, now what happens to their citizenship?
Null and void.
The moment they start claiming, a great majority of people, they're lining it up just for that. For you guys to claim that you're African on paper. So when they start shipping people out because they don't belong here, those people are going to be on the list.
I said this before.
You said it before with DACA.
With DACA, yeah, DACA. I tried to forewarn them. That was years ago. Now, I remember something similar. I did a story on...
See? So basically, you saying I'm African American, you're not even a citizen of America. At all. The immigrant who just came over here yesterday got more rights than you. The transgender has more rights than you. The little fairy boy got more rights than you now because you just claim to be African American without any immigrant status. You don't have a visa. You don't have an immigrant package. You don't have nothing. You're claiming to be a wanderer within this country. You claim to be a non-citizen of this country when you claim to be African. You're basically invisible to this government.
I remember I did that whole documentary on Asheville, North Carolina. And as soon as I explained in full detail everything, I even interviewed people out there, put that on YouTube, then YouTube had an issue with that, took it down. I had to end up making that one of the movies that's on my website. But in Asheville, North Carolina, I'm going to say about 3 or 4 months after me releasing that doc, the reparations conversation started. And then the city created a community reparations commission, which was supposed to help the city make reparations for some of its so-called black residents a reality. Now, they still in plans with this. They plan to work with the community to pinpoint what compensation would look like. You can look this up. So it's not just California. It's North Carolina as well. See, but this is what I'm saying. You got to pinpoint it. You can't be like, well, yeah, my ancestors were slaves. Well, how do you know that? Well, my teacher told me. Because your grandparents and your great-grandparents, if they said they were working, that's when you can say, okay, well, they were enslaved, because enslaved means employment. But you still will have to prove it. You still will have to prove it. Okay? But that's the reason why I told y'all that slavery is not what they told us it was. It's totally different. It's employment. Hands down. And don't sit up there and go latch onto those stories saying that they didn't get paid. Because some people got paid differently. Keep in mind.
Before he even say it, I'm going to say how they got paid. Sharecroppers, clothes, housing, little piece of land. That's how they get paid. They got paid as sharecroppers. They got paid with housing, they got paid with clothing, and they got paid with a certain percentage of the crops that they grew, because they shared crops. For what? Why would you share crops? For compensation. I got this land, you got money. This is what we'll do. You need some of this product that grows off the ground, right? This is my ground. I can lease this ground to you. I can work the ground, give you a portion of the product that comes out of the ground, and you pay me in installments, house, clothing, whatever I need. You pay me like that. It was almost like a trade-off. That's what sharecropping was, basically, was a trade-off.
We talking about 1863, 1865 was when it was so-called abolished. The Federal Reserve note ain't happened to the 1900s. So we ain't talking about no paper money anyway. Think about that.
That's why I said, let me say it before he say it, because that's the truth. That's what happened. It wasn't paid with money. So how can you get reparations with money? How can you be repaid what you was never paid? So you should want your land back. That green dollar ain't got nothing on that green field. You understand me?
So how else?
They were involved in peonage. Peonage.
Talk about it.
That means you work to pay off your debt. You know how we saw them, we would see movies when someone would come and eat and they didn't have enough money to pay, and then they would throw them a dish rag and say, okay, well, go wash the dishes.
Ooh. I hope y'all
That's
listening.
how they were paying off their debt back then, with peonage.
Listen,
That's slavery.
But
some people had bad contract.
There we go.
Because
you
they
gotta
would
find out which one it was.
They may make them wash dishes for 3 months for one meal. That's what they're talking about when they're talking about that type of slavery, an unfair working condition, an unfair treatment. When it may only take you, a few days or a week. You only ate one meal.
And those that were insured were the people that were working in the farms, working in the fields, the sharecroppers. Now, if they were sharecroppers, yes, and don't forget that the so-called slave masters or the employer had to insure everything. Because if something went wrong, it was going to fall back on him or her. And it doesn't matter their skin complexion. If somebody got injured on that job, it wasn't going to fall on a person. It was going to fall on the employer.
Mm-hmm.
The so-called slave master. Y'all got to know about these terms. And that's how you can find out that a lot of them were insured through the banks.
All these big banks today started with raping our people. Unfair occupation practices. That was what was going on. Why you think millions of blacks left the South to come up north so they can have better working conditions and contracts?
We do have a book coming out on this too, guys. Be looking out for this book. Okay? I'm not even going to state the name of the book, but just be looking for it very shortly. We're going to come out with a book on this within the next month or two. All right? People got to understand who should be held responsible. Because we're pointing the finger at each other when we should point it right back on this federal government. It's a reason why they continuously want us to look at, we're going to propose this idea, and they're not acting on it for a reason. Well, what you trying to say, Dan? Are you trying to say you're not down for I'm down for reparations, but I want it to be reality. And I'm telling you, the only way for it to be reality,
give us our land back,
is this. You have to be real all the way around, the entire spectrum. So we can't put the blame on the governors. They're just the supervisors of each state. Well, who's in control of the states? And who's insuring them? Just like my wife said, these insurance companies did deals with these banks. That's who we should be coming after. And you know those banks can't be banks without the federal government involved. They know what's up. It's just that a lot of our people don't, because they're masking it with